Mitchison from the European Commission Office.
Thank you. Lieve, you describe a process of decision-making, collective decision-making in Brussels, but you made it clear that there's been some resistance from some of the member states, at least some of the time. Could you tease out a little, is this resistance because they don't actually want the same objectives, because they're not trying to reduce poverty, because they don't regard that as important? Or is it resistance because they resist the institution, because they think, the member state should be doing this, rather than doing this through the collective institutions of Brussels?
Thanks for a very complex question, actually. But I think the answer is also complex, because there's, as some of the speakers said here, of course, already, there's a compromise. The poverty target in itself is a compromise, like Europe is a compromise. The fact of not having sufficient competences in the social area is also a compromise. And specifically, this member state has resisted the Commission having any competences in social areas, actually, over the history of the building up of the European Union, not only the social. So therefore, there is a complex way of governance, and I would agree that in my presentation I try to say that we are, for the moment, in a transformational, and what will the transformation that will happen that will have to happen one way or another. We cannot be staying where we are. Europe collectively and the Commission in it. It goes much wider than the social area, of course, but also in the social area, I would agree that we really rediscuss the target, and we are busy doing this. So any help in redefining that would be, of course, but also very politically difficult, because it is a compromise we reached in that target, and then is not followed by some of the member states, because the target was accepted in the Council, and you have a voice in the Council also there. So accepting and then not following it up, it's also a difficulty. I would argue with the competences, it's not the end of the opportunity, there's a beginning of an opportunity, because it is I believe that what we are doing for the moment in the context of Europe 2020 and the economic governance cannot go without a real social compact or a social pact one way or another. That doesn't mean increasing the competences, but at least make sure that social is also very well defined in what we're doing, and not just in an annex of an employment guideline. I believe social is way beyond an employment only, and I think our welfare state and our social areas, social competences have shown that at all of the member states level. So I think we need to make sure that social is also in the context of economic. But I'm going to leave it at there. But it is, as I said in my presentation, we are in the middle of a transformation. The system, as it is now, is ungovernable and ungoverned from the social area, even if this goes against what I have to do. I have only joined very recently this directorate specifically to try to transform it also, and to transform it in a joined up way of working. I think that's a positive side. It is a difficult side also, because for the moment the powers are in the macroeconomic levels, also in the member states. Thanks.
Is Mr. Dirks?
Yeah, I have a question for George Menz. I was a bit surprised when you mentioned that the support programs for the Southern European countries are aimed at cutting the labor market into tiers. If my memory recalls that in the case of Spain, which is a country where the labor market is exactly split into two, and my understanding of the recommendation of Europe was always that the aim was to actually create more of a single labor market. So I'd like to a bit more explanation on that. I also have a question for Phillipe Pochet. There I was surprised about the statement that there is no link between the current financial public finance crisis and the radical change in the pension system. My understanding was that the changes in the pension system raised the long-term sustainability of public finances, and by ensuring that in the long term public finances would be more sound, it would allow member states to spend more now. So this would encourage, let's say, Germany or countries which have relatively good public finances to actually raise spending and encourage growth at this moment. So that would be my argument of making this link, and I'd like to have your reaction to that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, with regards to your question, I mean, I think there might have been a bit of a misunderstanding there. The argument is not that the Commission's policy is directly aimed at disintegrating the Spanish labor market. I mean, that would be scandalous if that were indeed the case. I don't think even the most hard-headed neoliberals inside the Commission are attempting to accomplish that. The argument is that effectively the sort of austerity programs that you are now seeing and that you can study in Southern Europe, especially in Italy and Greece, are effectively undermining employee rights and are driving into the direction of very, very severe wage restraint. And that, of course, is contributing to the problem of pillarization and the disintegration of the labor market. So the argument that I'm putting forward is a bit more complex. There's of course, no direct attempt by the Commission to try to effectively solidify this stratification of the labor market. And again, I mean, that would be outrageous if that were indeed the case. But there is an indirect effect here occurring, and that I think is to do with austerity measures which are quite severe and which are not really thought through in all their implications, I would say.
I said that there is, for me, not direct link with the long-term problem. But I just gave the example of my country, because my country was rather interesting. After 1.5 years without government, we had a government. And in 3 days, we had a pension reform, a radical pension reform without any consultation of the social partner. Was that the key issue for Belgium? No, it was not. Was that rational? Perhaps. We have a problem with the pension, but it was not linked to the crisis. It was not linked with the analysis of what should Belgium do after 1.5 years without government. In the short term, it's just a window of opportunity for a liberal minister to push a reform that many think is necessary. I don't say it's unnecessary, but it changed nothing with the debt of Belgium. It changed nothing with the spread we had compared to Germany. It changed, okay, there had a few demonstrations of the trade union and we returned to normality. That's good. But nothing to do with this kind of analysis or where we are and where are the key measures that have to be taken in the short term to restore confidence. Because that's a long-term confidence, and the market are not saying what will be the liability of the pension in Belgium in 2050. For the moment, that's not what they are looking, neither the rating agency. So I think that's nothing to do with the financial and the finance crisis. Could have some positive impact in the future, but that's another debate for me.
David Brew, not wearing any particular hat, but a member of the European movement. I'd just like to continue the theme that Neil raised with Lieve, if I may, in the light of the discussion here, just to ask the speakers to address the question of whether it matters that social Europe dies in the sense of having policy attempting to be formulated at EU level and targets measured at EU level and so I understand that we all believe that poverty is a bad thing as a sort of general statement. And Lieve pointed to the UK, amongst others, being particularly opposed to policy being set at EU level. My question, in a sense, is, will it stop us from achieving the economic objectives of Europe 2020 that there is not an effective social policy element and governance? Will it matter at the end of the day? Not in terms of, you know, does poverty matter? Because clearly poverty does matter. But will it matter that it's not appropriately governed and measured and targeted at EU level?
That's an excellent question. I think we should open that to all 5 of our speakers. Should we start with the representative of the Commission?
I think it matters for several. Of course, I will say it matters, but it matters for different reasons, I believe. First of all, what I already said. One of the strengths of Europe is the social models that we have and the welfare that we have been able to secure. And in that context, for a large part of the population, but amazingly, we still have quite a few millions of people living on the edge, and that increases. We are, in Europe, increasingly interdependent on each other, so I don't believe that each country can assure this continuation of the welfare or over time, independently from working together. Working together can be defined how, for the moment, as defined in the OMC and exchanges of best practices. Okay, this could be, I could extend this quite long way, but I think the first argument for the moment in the crisis is the interdependency, the economic. Social has an economic benefit. One of the speakers here said exactly that the countries that have the best welfare systems have also showed to be most resistant against the crisis and unemployment, actually. So for the moment, a lot of the debate goes the other way around, but this is shown in facts and figures, actually. What I tried also to show is that together we can show better efficiency gains also. We can learn from each other faster, and that's what happens in some of the countries like Greece and Spain, not having efficient and investments in the social welfare systems they has wasted a lot of resources, a lot of time. So Social Europe can play a role there. And I finally believe that if we had started with Social Europe, we might have been further away already forward, rather than only focusing. We're not together only for the euro, and even the UK has not joined the euro. So why are we together trying to build further Europe in a more global world? It is not just for the euro. I believe our citizens would believe that it is for their own well-being and social welfare.
That's an excellent question. I teach social policy, and I begin always my course saying, okay, there is 2 ways to teach you. One is the very short one, 2 hours. I give you the hard fact, few directive in health and safety. That's the directive, and we finish. And the other way is much more interesting. It's all the process, all the discussion about social Europe, and the redefinition from the beginning. What is social Europe? What is the goal of social Europe? What are the instruments to reach a social Europe? What are the domains that we could discuss at European level? And you can have, from the beginning, we had the discussion, what is the social side of Europe? And I think it's permanent, and that's interesting, the permanent redefinition every 10 years. And the last 10 years, we had the definition of the instrument where open method of coordination. Who is speaking now about the open method of coordination? Nobody, only the student having done a PhD on that. The other don't care. That's no longer the tool that you are dealing with. You are returning to hard law, we are returning to different instruments. So I will take a very constructivist approach. What is social Europe is the discussion about social Europe and the permanent discussion and redefinition of the concept, which shows that you cannot have Europe without a discussion about social Europe, but in the same time, always difficult to define this moving target of social Europe. That's the first thing I would like to say. The second thing, it's really interesting if you look at the domain of social Europe. What was dealt and what's shown during the last 10 years is exactly what you said to your student will never go at European level, even for a discussion, because so much difference at national level. That was poverty, that was healthcare, that was education. If you take education as part of social Europe or social policy, it's welfare states, it's pension, all the stuff you don't think one scholar in the 90s saying that that domain should be discussed at European level. So it's also the expansion of the discussion. But in the same time, you are completely right. If you look now, what are the results, and not just the process, the dynamic, as Tolga shown us, which is always difficult to measure. You have little concrete act also in a legal term, and then you can return to the first part. You can teach social Europe in 1 hour if you wish to your students. Very little.
I find myself sympathetic to the Commission's position here. What's happening or what's not happening has something to do with what Martin Rhodes and others calls the double cleavage in European social and employment policies. On the one hand, we've got the federalist ideals versus the subsidiarists. So that's one level, one tier. Another tier is that among the member states, we've got the social democrats on the one hand and the more economic liberals. So the Commission has always been, finding themselves or itself in between a rock and a hard place. And the OMC was one way of overcoming this double cleavage problem. So to overcome or sideline this double cleavage problem. And what I try to show here is that politics matters at the domestic level. Politics does matter. Yes, EES does matter. OMC may matter. But the literature shows that in most cases, the EES, the OMC, has mostly been used as a trump card or as a leverage, as opposed to the cause of change at the domestic level. So we need to really understand what's happening at the domestic level in terms of taking into account of ideas that may or may not come from the EU, stem from the EU, domestic constellations of power, dominant interests, and domestic institutions. So we need to look at them all at the same time in order to observe what's happening at the ground, at the domestic level. So I do find myself very sympathetic to Madam Fransen and others at the Commission in looking for ways to overcome these problems.
Social Europe matters because it directly connects the EU with its citizens. The fact of the matter is that although the benefits of the single market are well known within academic circles, they rarely get trickled down to the EU electorate. So often you'll find that the ordinary person on the street has little idea that airfares are incredibly cheap because of liberalised air markets. So in a sense, EU social policy or social Europe has a real opportunity to connect with ordinary EU citizens and possibly turn the tide against rising levels of dissatisfaction across the EU with the EU as a set of institutions. I think that's hugely important, and Euro pessimism in part has some part surely, or is surely comprised of an element whereby ordinary individuals do not feel that the EU actually does something for them. A second point on EU social policy is that it is hugely important in terms of the implementation and achievement of governance architectures such as Europe 2020. One of the biggest failures in Lisbon II was that actually its neoliberal shift relative to Lisbon I marginalised a significant amount of social actors. So the ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation, for example, decided that it wouldn't really participate in those policies, and that it then became incredibly critical of Europe 2020. Voluntary agreements, flexible ways of governance that are at the moment very in fashion in the EU need a broad level of social actors if they are to be fully achieved, or at least go some way to be achieved. And therefore, you know, the social Europe has a part to play, and it is hugely significant.
I mean, I think Paul just made one point that I was going to make, and that has to do with legitimacy. But, I mean, on a purely pedantic note, I don't really attach a great deal of significance to Europe 2020. I mean, I think it's effectively the 10-year plan that followed the earlier 10-year plan, which was the Lisbon Agenda, and a bit like the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in the 1970s. It has now been decided that since the last 5-year plan failed, we're just going to reinvent the old one. That's, I think, insignificant. But what does matter for the broader process of European integration is the social dimension, because there's this not just legitimacy, there's also the question of effectively attempting to rebalance and embed the market integration thrust of the Commission. And in a way, I came into this panel hoping that I would be, to some extent, corrected with my pessimism. But in a way, if I learned that there's a proposal on the table from our friend here from the Commission, a proposal, not a directive, a proposal for 20% of the ESF, which in itself is less than 14% of the total EU budget, being committed to tackle youth unemployment. I leave this panel with, in some sense, my pessimism being firmly intact. And in fact, I think in many ways the picture might be more dire than one would have expected. I think the EU dimension also matters because if we were simply to effectively surrender all hopes for social Europe, that'd be one thing. But of course, European integration is not only not helping, it's starting to meddle with member states and starting to effectively impede social policy making at the national level. So if we can not only expect almost nothing coming out of the Commission, but if in addition to that, the Commission is actively interfering with member states, then I think there's a serious problem. And the technocratic unelected governments in Greece and Italy are, of course, precisely starting to reduce social policy provisions, and elsewhere in Northern Europe, through the kind of ECJ decisions I mentioned, we see a similar interference with effectively the potential for social policy. So there is in that sense, I think, a fairly dire picture emerging. But if your question is whether the social dimension matters at all, I would very strongly concur with Paul and say it does indeed, with regards to the legitimacy dimension. And if the Commission effectively does not truly help develop social policy, then at the very least we would need to rethink European integration. We would need to rethink giving enough room for maneuvers to the member states so that they can proactively design social policy and ramp up social spending without being effectively hindered in doing so.
Anne Packard, and like David, I'm a member of the European movement. The 11 definitions of poverty raises the question as to whether it's going to be cogent debate or a little bit of political headbutting that might reduce it to get some conformity and consistency. Because surely you need that consistency to measure delivery against consistent statistical data gathering. But there's a much more fundamental issue for me, actually, and that is that perhaps a single definition might be better for human dignity and those people who are in a real need of an improved situation. And when one of you referred this morning to institutional inertia, I wonder what your comment is about citizen inertia and the potential for citizens actually to combat that inertia. Sorry, could I just say, perhaps we shouldn't worry too much about 11 definitions of poverty, because our own government at one stage had very considerably more about what constituted rural Scotland, but we'll gloss over that bit of history.
Can I just ask a clarification on what you mean by citizen inertia, just so that I can respond to the question properly?
One or two of you who've referred to the electorate. The electorate has a citizen voice as well as the voice through the ballot box or the voice to its MEP. And at some point, people who care about the fact that there are still appalling levels of poverty, which must be addressed in a civilized world, how that voice can be best articulated across Europe, not merely in one member state. Because I think some people feel divorced from European legislation. They feel we're over-governed by too many tiers of government. They feel powerless to have a voice. And somehow maybe that needs to be addressed.
Thanks. I'm glad we clarified that, because we may have ended up having a completely different discussion. Okay, in terms of, I think the idea of 11 different definitions of poverty may not be a problem for the moment if you see that at some point in the future, maybe a relaunched Europe 2020, that gets reduced down. And there becomes a single definition of poverty, although considering the negotiations over the poverty target and the broader argument that we have in the paper, I think it's fair to say that I'm not so optimistic that could happen, even though I personally would like that very much. The idea of a kind of citizen inertia, I mean, this has always been a huge problem in terms of social movements at the EU level. All may not be lost, though, in the sense that over the last 7 years, maybe since 2005, we've really seen quite a shift in the European Parliament. Regardless of whether they're from the members are from the left or right, it's actually positioning itself as a defender of European citizens and social Europe. Now, its agenda-setting capacity is indeed very limited in the social field. It wasn't really consulted in Europe 2020, but it has, at various times, for example, during the Working Time Directive negotiations or the Temporary Agency Workers Directive negotiations, really felt that it was defending and purposefully said that it was defending European citizens. I personally see the connection between the Parliament and European citizens as being key to changing the current kind of citizen inertia, and I think that the responsibility lies with the MEPs. So I think to look at forming more social interest groups at the EU level may not actually be the way forward here. I think it may be more through the Parliament as an institution.
Basically, I agree. On the target itself, we're trying to look at redefining extreme situations, of course, because that's to do also with dignity and with unacceptability on the European territory. But besides this, you raised the point, of course, of citizens' participation, I would call it, or lack of participation. in the Europe 2020 strategy, there was a request actually, and I think a lot of citizens who participated quite strongly in the OMC work, have lost their way in the 2020 participation, or have not been included in the consultation processes in some countries. I mean, I hear that some countries or some regions have actively had the debates with citizens on their 2020 national reform programs, and others have not. So, and I think we've lost the participation process there much more, and that's a serious concern that we have beside the European level of the MEPs. There we have an opportunity, I believe. Next year is the year of the citizens, but is also the year of the preparation of the elections of the MEPs. This country doesn't have a great participation rate in the voting for MEPs. Maybe that's also a thing that you cannot blame Brussels for all the time. But there's quite a few things that have been said this morning that I'm not agreeing with, not only out of ideological positions, of course, because that's not for me to have, but there's quite a few mistakes that have been said. So I'm not going to be able to correct all of them, but I would like not to leave this room by thinking that by the audience thinking that we are now dropped the OMC at all. The OMC is still alive. I think the recommendations we are now discussing with the OMC in the different remits. So I think that's very much alive. It is becoming part of 2020, and how that becomes, it's ungoverned for the moment, as you say. It is governed, but it is still in a limbo, in a way, in transformation, and we need to do better in making sure that that is clear also, because some of you have questioned all of the different strands, but in a way it should be clear to everybody how that is done. 2020, even if you question the value of Europe 2020, it is the strategy that was agreed at council level by everybody, by all of our member states, as the strategy to go for. SMART is, of course, not only dealing with not being stupid, but it's also dealing with developing the knowledge economy and therefore having to develop the skills and the lifelong learning in that direction. So I would like, sometimes we do things that are stupid like everybody, but I think that was not the idea. Subsidiarity, I'm not questioning subsidiarity per se, but I think and we are not looking for more competences. Let's be that clear in the social area. But leaving the social areas totally at the local level without even making it visible at the interdependent economic and social economic level collectively it doesn't do us right for Europe in general. And so we need to find a way to respect subsidiarity. I'm from Belgium, respecting very well, and I'm Flemish, so I understand the issues of subsidiarity and local decision maker quite well, and I have no ambition, and I think the Commission doesn't have an ambition to increase the specific competences and hard law in the areas of social. But we do have a concern of our citizens, and there the credibility and the legitimacy of our citizens have increased for the moment under pressure of the crisis and the austerity measures around the crisis. And if Europe collectively cannot give an answer to that, we are not credible. Thanks.
I think that's on the indicator. The problem that you had an indicator that cannot move don't work. If you have a relative indicator, which is 60% of the median, you cannot reduce that except if the poorest layer will get more than the richest, which is not in the area of globalization the most possible way for the future. Even for this indicator, you can reduce poverty. With the indicator, you continue the crisis, because then the medium level will go down and you have less poor. And you can increase the poverty by having high growth, which was the case of Ireland, because then you have more poor when you have high growth. So the indicator, the main indicator, was not the right instrument if you want to show that you are doing something. And then they invent other indicator, and that was mixed up. That's nobody understood what is the goal of the 3, but you said no, 11, that I have to return to that field to find 8, I don't know. The second thing, and I think it's much more dangerous, and you said that's poverty, no, the new definition of poverty is child poverty. So you have the good poor, the child, and you have the bad poor, the parents. What's that? What's that? That's the Anglo-Saxon view of the poor. That's not the continental view of the poor. If the child is poor, it's because the parents are poor. So that's my vision. And no, but in Anglo-Saxon you have the poor child, and then you have the extreme poverty, so the good poor. And we return then with something very dangerous, the alliance of the social side with the liberal discourse. Because all the liberals will say we will help the good poor, the child, and extreme poverty. And that's not the welfare state. The welfare state is not to help the poor. The last point I would like to make is about ETUC. I was the advisor for all the treaty reforms from the Maastricht until now, and that's for the first time that ETUC, which is a body supporting European integration for strategic vision, saying there is no other route that to have more integrated Europe in a global world. That's the first time they say we will not support the new treaty, we are against. And then we arrive, because you can speak the citizen, but also organized body, at the limit of the support from the European integration, which is very dangerous, because when rank and file, and there are more and more against Europe, and you will have part of the leadership saying the same, which was not the case before, not at all the case. Even the French CGT, when he entered in the ETUC, was in favor. Then you risk to have the idea of Europe, which will be completely lost. And you can continue to say that smart subsidiarity. People will say, I don't care. I don't want to continue with Europe, which will be, the test case will be the Greek case for me. Say, okay, I prefer to be out of Europe with all the risk, even we were in favor of European integration, that to continue to be the rat, and you are testing remedies on you, on me. And that's really risky, because the time for changing the direction of Europe, the message of Europe, I think it's not in years, it's in months, to have a different discourse, global discourse, and reconnect with intermediate bodies and citizens.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I personally have many questions, and I'm sure you do as well. We have 40 minutes now for lunch. Please, all of you, come and join us for lunch, and please ask your questions of the speakers individually, but also join me in thanking 5 excellent speakers.